thank you everybody for coming. This is the fourth in the sequence of Electoral Commons events, which were designed to help people think about the election. How many people here have been to one of the previous Electoral Commons events? Oh, that's cool. Which one did you go to?
Climate change.
Climate change? What else?
Immigration one.
The immigration one? Anybody go to trade? Hear any trades? A trade? What do you think? Yeah? Informative? The whole idea is that in a time where all we're hearing from the candidates is rhetoric, we thought since we have a lot of expertise on campus, you should get to hear what kind of a thoughtful, impartial scholar has to say about the issues that the candidates are spinning one way or another. This time, this issue may be a little more polarized than some of them, but I'm glad to see so many people turn out to hear about it in any case. So this is the next to last. There's one more on race and economic equality next Friday, and then we'll be at the election. So let's enjoy this one. Let me tell you who's speaking here today. So to my right here, my good friend Alice Echols. She's professor of history and the Barbra Streisand Chair of Contemporary Gender Studies at USC. She's the author of 4 books that have shifted our understanding about the 60s, or the extended 60s, let's say. Daring to be Bad, Radical Feminism in America, from 67 to 75, which was named an outstanding book winner by Gustavus Meyers Outstanding Book Prize. Scars of Sweet Paradise, The Life and Times of Janis Joplin, another best book of 1999 by the LA Times. Her articles have appeared in scholarly journals and popular publications, and her essays, Shaky Ground, Sixties and Its Aftershocks, kind of a collection of it. She's been on ABC's 2020 show, the History Channel, the BBC, and there's a documentary, Southern Discomfort, about Janis Joplin, in which she also appears. She's been interviewed by all the important papers, New York Times, The Nation, other papers, appeared in a lot of radio programs, and Britain's most interesting program, morning talk show, the Today program. So let's start with Alice. We'll welcome Alice and hear what she has to say. We'll follow it up with Joe, and then I'll introduce him when he's ready to get up, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Okay? Alice, if you're good.
Great. Great to be here. Thank you, Richard. I have to say that the slide of the pussycat is accidental. Okay, I want to begin with talking about a 2008 conversation on Fox News between Bill O'Reilly and author Mark Rudolph. And in this conversation, there was a very telling exchange about gender. O'Reilly asked his guests, you know, you get a woman in the Oval Office, the most powerful person in the world, so what's the downside? Rudolph did not miss a beat, replying, you mean besides the PMS and mood swings? Moments later, Rudolph used what's become a familiar weapon in candidate Donald Trump's arsenal, the, hey, I was just joking, defense. Didn't mean it. Now, this exchange on Fox News happened in the aftermath of what quickly became a memorable moment in a very tough primary campaign between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. In New Hampshire, Clinton was asked about the wear and tear of the campaign, and she responded with a rare display of vulnerability, and I want to show you this clip.
It's not easy. It's not easy. And I couldn't do it if I just didn't, you know, passionately believe it was the right thing to do.
It's not the cat talking.
I have so many opportunities for this country. I just don't want to see us fall backwards. So, you know, this is very personal for me. It's not just political, it's not just public. I see what's happening. We have to reverse it. And some people think elections are a game. They think it's like who's up or who's down. It's about our country. It's about...
So, I am sorry that that did not appear in a visual form, but I have to tell you, when I was doing the work to prepare for this, you know, I watched this video a few days ago, and I had Googled, you know, New Hampshire, Hillary cheering up. And I thought to myself, read, but it's not as though she fell apart. Now, and also, she regained whatever composure she slightly lost. However, even in this one unguarded moment, it provoked an immediate backlash. One famous political cartoonist portrayed a crying Hillary Clinton, complaining of the meanness of dictators and terrorists, under the headline, "Madam President meets the bad guys." Also in this cartoon was a miniaturized Bill Clinton with this thought bubble coming out of him. This is when PMS goes nuclear, and clearly this is a reference to the nuclear code. Now these were not aberrant, one-off comments. The idea that women are so ruled by their biology that their emotions will get the best of them has been put forward time and again as the reason that they should not be allowed to hold powerful positions. I'll give you another example. Conservative talk show host G. Gordon Liddy, a key member of Richard Nixon's Watergate crew, and many of you are too young to remember that, but they did engage in some questionable to illegal behavior. In 2009, Liddy said about then Supreme Court nominee Sonia Sotomayor that he hoped the court's, and I quote, "key conferences aren't when she's menstruating or something, or just before she's going to menstruate. Lord knows what we would get then," he complained. And more recently, of course, there was Trump's blood coming out of her, whatever, comment about Megyn Kelly. Now actually, I would say, any show of emotion, particularly vulnerability, has been seen for decades, for longer than decades, as career-ending for female candidates. This was the view of many in the pundit class who 8 years ago believed that Hillary Clinton had totally blown it in New Hampshire when her composure ebbed a bit. Interestingly, though, the majority of Democratic voters in New Hampshire chose her, not Obama. Apparently, again, the pundits eventually came to think because those near tears, not quite tears, humanized her. Now, it may be that the vote in the 2008 Democratic primary was the beginning of a very gradual shift in how voters view female candidates. Now, I would say that the unusualness of this election has ratcheted up this shift. This time around, the gender politics have been absolutely inescapable, but not always in predictable ways. As New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd points out, and I quote, "In this race, there's someone who gets their feelings hurt really easily, and their emotions are all over the place, and is moody and gossipy and bitchy, and sort of shrewish and hysterical sometimes. Oh, and also obsessed with hair care. And that's, well, that would be Donald Trump." Burnishing this gender role reversal is Hillary's performance, especially during the 3 debates, where it was she who came across as self-possessed, as presidential, if sometimes a bit wooden and predictable. Now, others besides Maureen Dowd have commented on this gender reversal, but you know, it's not really been widely discussed. One reason it hasn't, I think, been seized upon by more pundits is that both candidates also telegraph different messages about themselves. With Trump, there's his macho bluster, and with Clinton, there are her efforts this time around, and this hadn't been the case in 2008, to wrap her campaign in pink. So Trump's emotional swings, which would be absolutely disqualifying for a female candidate, are for his supporters, I would argue, nullified by his performance of masculinity, his swagger, the baseball cap, and the trash talk. And not just against Hillary. I mean, this goes back to the primary season and the remarks about little Marco and Jeb Bush having low energy. And Hillary's steeliness, which she deploys especially effectively when discussing foreign policy, is offset by her performance of what one pundit calls maternal femininity. Now, Clinton has also surrounded herself with high-profile female entertainers, from Beyonce and Katy Perry to Cher. And much of her campaign gear, if you go online, you'll see this, plays on the theme of female empowerment. Now this can, of course, edge into the territory of the F word. Anybody know what I mean when I mention the F word? Well, feminism. And indeed, I think it clearly has now. Especially with the Clinton campaign's appropriation of Trump's "such a nasty woman" rebuke. But in this campaign, what fascinates me is that Clinton has been able to pivot from, on the one hand, the caring grandmother, a woman who aligns herself with the mothers of the movement or with children of immigrants who are worried about deportation, to, on the other hand, a steely adversary of ISIS and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, this has been a fascinating campaign, and much of it has pivoted on race and ethnicity and gender, with white men, Trump's strongest supporters, in particular many argued white working class men, and African American women, particularly somewhat older ones, Clinton's most loyal supporters. And it's worth noting, I mean, and this is another wrinkle in this campaign that hasn't been written enough about, that this represents a real shift in Clinton's base since 2008, when she outperformed Obama among white working class voters, including men. In primaries 8 years ago, Clinton took just 48% of the vote among whites earning $100,000 or more, 54% among whites earning between 50 and 100K, and 60% among whites making less than 50K. So why, you might ask, do so many white working class voters apparently prefer Trump to her in this election? Because this has changed. Is it the Republicans' concerted effort to turn a very popular Secretary of State into a liar and a crook? And she was actually very popular. 60% of the American public approved of her then. Is it that Clinton has become over time associated with the latte-sipping Martha Vineyards crowd, who left-wingers like Bernie Sanders attacked, at least during the primary season, for selling the white working class down the river for bad trade deals? And could it be that the effects of neoliberalism, globalization, and automation are registering now more powerfully and painfully with white working class voters than they did 8 years ago? And what I would like to know is whether the feelings, those feelings of powerlessness and aggrievement, and I think shame, that seem to animate these voters, or at least the white working class men who support Trump, were ratcheted up because the Democratic candidate is female. Now for me, and many other campaign watchers, one of the most perplexing aspects of this presidential race is how Trump and his surrogates time and again have chosen to get ensnarled in the politics of gender, rather than staying on message and hammering home the campaign's original message of trade, jobs, and fading U.S. global dominance. Really, you want to go after Megyn Kelly of Fox News, or Dana Bash of CNN, and risk consolidating the idea that yours is the campaign of bullying white men? Is it a case of, and I think this is a real question, is this a case of thin-skinned, undisciplined guys who can't stay on message, or do they calculate that what they're doing will bring out their base support among the white working class? At this point, I think the consensus out there is that this stems from an undisciplined campaign and candidate. Now this may be true, but here's what some recent polling also suggests, and it confirms what academics writing about identity have long argued. Identities do not exist in hermetically sealed silos. Gender is not a standalone category, and neither is class or race. They are what we would call mutually constitutive. That is, they are constituted in relation to each other. And in gender studies, this idea has a name, and it's called intersectionality. So when it comes to pro-Trump white working class voters, which many see, again, as Trump's core constituency, what's happening is that increasingly this constituency is fracturing along the lines of gender. This isn't entirely new. White working class men's support for Republican presidential candidates has grown during the past 2 elections. By contrast, white working class women's support has declined. Now, research with these women reveals that they are turned off by what they see as Trump's coarse, entitled, bullying style. One journalist reasons that his quote-unquote locker room talk doesn't go down well with white working class women because many of them actually have jobs in male-dominated fields such as construction, factory work, transportation, where sexual harassment is not uncommon. I would argue that, although the journalist doesn't mention this, that this might include people who work in offices as well, or women who work in offices. It turns out that these white working class women also have different policy concerns than their male counterparts. Rather than jobs, white working class women have fixed on national security and terrorism, and they worry about Trump's aggressiveness and whether it might get us into a war or some conflict best avoided. And in another difference, these women are more focused on the cost of higher education and preschooling, more concerned about paid leave, child care, minimum wage, and equal pay than their male counterparts. These differences are most pronounced among single white working class women, the single women here, who apparently trend to the left, and this is a demographic that is likely to grow in America. Still, here's the thing, we do not know how these white working class women are going to vote in this election. What we do know is that over time, these voters, who constitute actually the majority of the white working class at 53%, will be crucial to any party that wants to be competitive in the future. Will they increasingly vote as they please, irrespective of what men think? As one writer recently pointed out, you know, in the privacy of a voting booth, and removed from the sexism that is still circulating out there, it's still out there. Women needn't worry about pleasing men or worrying about whether or not they meet Trump's standards of attractiveness. Apparently, it would seem the only quality that really matters in evaluating women. Now, I want to end by asking whether sexism has, you know, in a more direct way, has played a role in this campaign. On the one hand, one could argue that sexism couldn't be much of a factor since Clinton enjoyed such high ratings when she was Secretary of State. On the other hand, the presidency is a whole different order of magnitude. And studies of the pre-primary season and the primary season show that press coverage of Clinton was overwhelmingly negative, while that of Trump and Sanders was overwhelmingly positive. Indeed, according to one Harvard study, 84% of Clinton coverage in this period was negative in tone. The email story, more than anything, came to define her, still does, and in no small part because the media erroneously reported that the FBI was conducting a criminal investigation into her email. Here's the thing. Clinton is a famously cautious politician, and all of this negative coverage only encouraged greater cautiousness. Not a good thing, especially when your opponent is flamboyant, shoot from the hip, outsider Donald Trump. Clinton developed this cautiousness and reserve decades ago when her husband's political career in Arkansas found her, and to some extent because of Hillary's unconventionality. It was her feminism during Bill Clinton's first term as governor that, as much as anything, lost him votes after his first term. Voters rejected her for multiple reasons. Her decision to keep her own name, Rada, to work full-time as a lawyer, and not to mention her hair and sartorial choices. She knew that her refusal to be a conventional first lady cost her husband votes. And by the time he was campaigning for the governorship again, Hillary Clinton pivoted, making herself over into a more conventional appearing spouse whose last name was now that of her husband. Now, as president, Bill Clinton may have been the most successful of triangulators, by which I mean he was able to appropriate Republican causes for his own, and in the process move the Democratic Party to the center, away from the slight left. And Hillary might have acquired a sleek new look, but to Republicans, Bill and Hillary remained the 1960s and deplorable because of that. Now, I think it's true that Hillary is not a natural glad-handing politician the way her husband is. But part of how she became who she is really related to all the bashing she took when she was a feminist. And its construction, even though the term wasn't used against her, but I'll use it, as a nasty woman, even then. That made her more guarded, more private. Again, not a good thing for a politician. She's the candidate, most people assume, who would bore you to death with policy details if you were having a beer with her. And likability has simply mattered more for female candidates. Whether we may be now at a tipping point here, where a woman can be nasty and get elected president, well, we'll see. And I'm going to hand this over now to my colleague, Joe Boone.
Before I introduce Joe, I'm going to give the person here an opportunity to try to fix what we couldn't get going before, just in case you want to use anything, right? So maybe while that's happening, maybe what we'll do is just have a few questions for Alice. We'll just change the format a little bit. Okay? You good with that? Good, good, good. Just in case you want to use it, let's make sure that we can. Oh, you don't need it? Oh, in that case, we don't have to do that. In that case, we'll go directly to our second speaker, and we'll save questions for the end. Okay? So, Professor Boone, Joseph Boone, is Professor of English, Comparative Literature, and Gender Studies in USC Dornsife College. He was the chair of the English department for a number of years, from 2001 to 2005. Professor Boone researches a novel genre, gender and queer studies, narrative theory, and also modernism. His latest book, The Homoerotics of Orientalism, received the Faculty Recognition Award from Phi Kappa Phi, which is a really important honor society on campus. He's a recipient of fellowships and awards from the American Council of Learned Societies, the Stanford Humanities Center, the Huntington Library, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Guggenheim, the Rockefeller, anything else you can name, he's already won. So let's invite Joe to come up and talk for a while, and then we'll open it up for questions for both. Please, Professor. Got the cat back, it looks like.
Yeah, I won't be using this either, so you can take it. You can just stop. I'll check on the time here. I'm delighted to be here to talk to you, and delighted to share the podium with Alice, who's been my chair in gender studies for many years. Indeed, that's my segue into my presentation. A year ago, a little over a year ago, Alice asked me what topic I'd be using for this fall gender studies senior seminar that I was slated to teach. I didn't have an idea in the world. I didn't like the old ones I'd done before. I needed something new. And then I started thinking, well, you know, by fall 2016, I just bet Clinton will be the Democratic presidential nominee. This is before the Sanders phenomenon had happened. And you know, whether she wins or loses, the fact that for the first time a major party has nominated a woman makes that a historical event important enough to center a course on. So even though I'm far from being a political scientist, I decided to devise my seminar under the rubric Women, Gender in the U.S. Presidential Election, focusing on power, politics, and women in terms of the presidency, past and present. My format that I devised for the course was this, that every 3-hour weekly session would begin with, say, 45 minutes or so, just talking about what had happened that week on the campaign trail, in the media, water fountain conversation related to the way that gender was being deployed as a subtle or not so subtle issue or campaign tool or weapon. And then, after a break, we focus on various assigned texts that have fallen, because we're still in the course, have fallen into 3 units, and I'll briefly describe. First, we spent several weeks looking at actual historical figures in the U.S. who have made a bid for the presidency. And I decided to focus on one, Victoria Woodhull. How many people have heard of Victoria Woodhull? Raise your hand. Okay, that really great. Okay, so this is fascinating. This is a woman who ran for president in 1872. She was the center of a firestorm of media attention for a whole year and a half before her campaign sort of, fizzled out. A woman who had come from absolutely white trash backgrounds. Her father probably had sold her along with some of her sisters, had pimped them out to people. He was a medicine man doing one of these sort of, selling fake elixirs across the United States. He used his children as sort of spiritual readers. They would read people's minds and stuff, supposedly, and then he'd pimp them out. Horrible background. From this environment, which he sort of escaped when she was 15, although the family keeps trailing after her, bringing their sort of bad vibes with them, and that's really what ultimately brings her down. She was already a spiritualist, really believed in higher powers, and that she had sort of a magnetic, magical healing ability, which is prevalent in the 19th century. Aligned her actually with a lot of feminists who were also spiritualists. She came to support, well, before she came to support the suffragist cause, she set up the first Wall Street firm run by a woman, which had a backdoor for women actually to come in and do their own investments, so they didn't have to deal with the men up front, which is totally successful, made her a millionaire with Vanderbilt's, Colonel Cornelius Vanderbilt's patronage. She set up the first weekly newspaper run by a woman, Claflin's Weekly, which published, among other things, the first printing in the U.S. of the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx's document. She increasingly took up workers' rights and socialism. She espoused, take this. And the point of even saying this is like how far we have not come, where no female candidate, Hillary Clinton or Sarah Palin, could do these kinds of things. She proudly promoted free love and her own sexual agency. And she got to Washington. She testified before Congress to great applause about suffragism, given the women the vote, became the darling of Katie Stanton and Susan Anthony.
The big suffragists, yeah.
Of the mid-19th century. And at this point then launched a presidential campaign declaring as her running mate, to his surprise, because he hadn't been asked ahead of time, Frederick Douglass, the famous ex-slave become avid abolitionist, one of the most famous African-American figure of the 19th century probably. So this is an incredible woman who's ultimately brought low by the fact that this white trash family that trails her around, finds her in New York. They all move in, like all 15 of them or so. She's giving one of her most impassioned talks on women's rights and her candidacy, at which one of the family members, drunken from the audience, shouts out, "Well, what about the guy you're shacked up with now," or something. And so she says, "Yes, I am a free lover." And that then starts sort of the negative buzz that finally leads to a crash. Her newspaper is charged with obscenity for actually just reporting on a woman who's been raped, and the fact that she's used vivid language for it lands her in prison, so she's in prison on the day of the election. but I didn't mean to actually do that whole segue, except to say, look at our history and how vivid a candidacy like that was. She was also, an atheist. None of these things could you be now as a man or a woman running for president. But we also looked at Margaret Chase Smith, who ran a fairly serious campaign in 1964 as a Republican, but a Republican so moderate it's unrecognizable in the terms of what we consider. She was a pragmatist who really worked both sides of the aisle. And Shirley Chisholm, who African-American Brooklyn congresswoman who mounted a campaign in 1972. So we focused on history at first, just for context, over a range of, the sensational like Woodhull, the race-oriented campaign of Chisholm, who very slyly said something, and cutely something like, well, I guess I'm the dark horse in this campaign. She could do that and get away with it to a Republican candidate to show how women in conservatism also can find common ground. And from here, we moved into fictional representations of women in positions of political leadership that range from the 1930s films starring Greta Garbo, Queen Christina, about an actual 18th century queen who finally abdicates, to the 1980s musical Evita, based on the life of Eva Perón, who was like first lady next door to power in Argentina, to Harold Churchill's wonderful play called Top Girls, about what it means to get on top and what you win and lose, to a cluster of 1960s films, The Manchurian Candidate. Have any of you seen this or the remake? It's this great film. You got to write it down, because it's so like 60s American paranoia about all sorts of evil Soviet influences entering our political system and fixing it, where basically this guy's been engineered to be a saboteur, to go to the convention and shoot the main candidate. But the person engineering all of this is a very sassy Angela Lansbury, who's like the power-hungry woman who's made a deal with the communists in order to kill the leading presidential candidate, so her husband, the vice presidential candidate, will become the candidate and she can be the puppet master behind the whole fall of the U.S. So on one hand, you have that happening in the Manchurian Candidate. 2 years later, in '64, you have Margaret Chase Smith mounting a serious run for the presidency, and the film, a comic film coming out, also worth watching, called Kisses for My President, starring none other than Fred McMurray as the first husband when his wife, Polly Bergen, is elected president. And it's all about, in a comic way, male anxiety about this entirely competent, cool woman who's in charge. And the fascinating thing about watching the film is it never demonizes her as president. It's all like everyone else in the film, except the bad guys and her husband, are accepting that she's competent and she can do it. It's either the outside international bad guy influences or that are almost sort of like coded McCarthy-like senators, or her husband, who are the problems, until, in the way that good Hollywood can so quickly turn into bad Hollywood, you won't believe this, she's been this force of nature, she's handled everything with cool, she gets pregnant. And a standing punchline throughout the film has been from Fred McMurray, he keeps trying to make love to her, but saying this is intimacy. We're losing it because you're becoming so politically involved. But of course, it's a power play on his part to assert his own waning dominance and sense of inferiority. Every time they get on the bed, the phone rings, and she has to run off to a meeting. But somewhere there, I guess the phone didn't ring, and she becomes pregnant, and she gives up the presidency. So there we have our Hollywood. Oh, we got to make it work out, however improbably. I also looked at the film. We've looked at the film Primary Colors, which stages sort of it's almost like Clinton-like story with Emma Thompson and John Travolta, and finally shifted out of many televisual examples I could have chosen. We focused on the sort of power-hungry machinations of Claire Underwood as First Lady, who really, wants to be president in House of Cards, and the bumbling comic attempts of Selena Meyers to deal with the fact that she unexpectedly becomes president in Veep, the HBO comedy series. And finally, we're getting ready now to move into a post-election, a whole unit of international women who have held positions of power throughout the whole last century. Now, conceiving the course, I, of course, assumed, should Hillary Clinton become the Democratic nominee, that the analysis of gender would be an important part of tracking the election, which, as you've indicated, it certainly is. But I never fathomed a year ago that the first female candidate to be put forth by a major party, as Hillary finally was, would ultimately face off with an opponent who embodies everything male, white, and angry about the ascension of women and people of color in contemporary America. I really did not think, like probably most of you, that Trump would trump all those other Republicans out there and offer up to us such a stark, then gendered contrast between the first woman serious candidate and a kind of masculinist bully and bravado and overt misogyny that Trump has come to stand for. So it unfolded along these lines. These are our two candidates, and indeed our culture, where airwaves and computers, even prior to the convention's conclusions, were inundated by an unbelievable range of rhetoric and representations and images pivoting on gender, both in regard to Trump and in regard to Clinton, that have only carried on throughout the campaign. In terms of Trump, these begin in the little hands reference that Rubio made, and the way that we have, on a public stage, Trump talking about the size of his endowment, as if that, point of pride is reason to be a candidate, accompanied by his vitriolic comments about various women's appearances. Who can see, what's her name, Carly Fiorina in the White House, a big-faced mug like that, to that moment in which he retweets that image, remember, of Cruz's wife in a not flattering pose next to a glam pose of Melania, which was clearly expressing the macho message, I'm the alpha male with the hot babe wife, and for Trump, he's the weak loser married to a shrew. Or, we've had his attacks on Hillary Clinton as a, quote, unbelievably nasty, mean enabler of her adulterous husband, building on an earlier innuendo that he made in 2015, that it's actually her fault for being a frigid, sexually unappealing woman, that he was an adulterer anyway. If Hillary can't satisfy her husband, he writes, I think this is another tweet, what makes her think she can satisfy America? If she can't satisfy her husband, satisfy America. There are so many levels of stereotypes collapsing in that one statement, from, what is a wife's role to assumptions about female sexuality and male satisfaction, and then that's all somehow tied to the nation, which is somehow put in this erotic encounter with the presidency there. So from one side, we've had a barrage of rhetoric that's led up to the latest revelations and things that are ongoing. In terms of Clinton, this is very much what Alice said. There are now 3 or 4 decades already of gender typing her, so that her image has been over-determined already as, among other things, a Lady Macbeth, a cold-blooded, ruthless woman, working by her husband's side to shove him into power at all cost, to a little more mundanely the overly smart, overly ambitious workaholic who is unattractively ambitious in such a way that it deprives her of having an intimate emotional life that we can glimpse into. It's almost like was a resentment from the media that you're not talking about, you know, the cookies or what happens at home, and therefore you're somehow not real. You're not a woman.
You're not authentic.
You're
You're not authentically female.
Exactly. This kind of criticism, you know, as one critic sort of summed it up that I've found, she's been for decades pilloried in the media as being, and this is not to say that Hillary Clinton doesn't have a slew of baggage and faults that she also brings with her, but for being too feminist, too independent, too influential, and I think that one actually gets to so much, too influential, that it means that she actually does get things done and has an influence. That's more frightening to sort of male power than anything else. This person sums up dangerous, conniving, ugly, unfuckable. You know, those are sort of the stereotypes out there. And I found it fascinating. I found that when she was First Lady, Katie Couric, who isn't a bad sort of interviewer in general, she unmasked Sarah Palin nicely, you know, 8 years ago. She was having an interview, an hour-long interview with Clinton, televised, where she sort of plaintively asks Clinton, but don't you enjoy doing stuff around here? They're in the White House, walking through one of the rooms, like saying, oh, I like that yellow tablecloth with the red napkins. And sometimes I really like doing floral arrangements. It's almost like she's begging her to be domestic, feminine, Martha Stewart. And that if you aren't a Martha Stewart, you are somehow unnatural, that something's missing here. So with Internet Campaign, where gender is all over the place, from the sort of coded reference like you were commenting on in some ways about her stamina, it's really about postmenopausal woman who doesn't have the energy. Her body is dictating or overriding her abilities, to the uproar about her having pneumonia, which is tied to the stability thing, but really is a code thing for, in some ways, maybe not a code word, but the thing is, it plays both ways. That whole thing about her not coming forth and being forthright, which does feed into the whole thing about keeping secrets and being too cautious. But for a man to soldier on and keep on the campaign trail while you have a fever would be a sign of stoicism and what you should do. Somehow for her it was a sign of weakness and secrecy, although as ex-Michigan Governor Jennifer Granholm wrote, powering through illness is what women do. Stoically, every period, single period, day. In other words, for the everyday woman and often mother, you still have to get the kids to school in the morning. You wake, even though you have 102 degree temperature, you have to get the groceries. You have to make sure the laundry's done. You know, there's this list of things that you are expected to soldier on with. So it's curious how that all worked and turned on her. So, like I said, I expected this campaign to be saturated in gender stereotypes and the like, but I didn't expect it to become a sort of referendum on feminism and potentially a teaching moment that reaches nationwide in the light of the media access tape and what that's unleashed, and second, the nasty comment and the last week. These seem to have triggered something that I have not seen in my class, the ongoing seminar before, which is young women who, in general, have been sort of, okay, we'll vote for her, but don't really love her kind of thing, a sense that she lacks the nuance of the kind of intersectional feminism that you were talking about and that my millennial class of feminists holds dear to heart. With these two moments, they have become energized because they speak to issues, larger issues that they feel in their everyday life. And for instance, the mic'd comments that Trump made on the bus with Billy Bush, tapped into a passion and rage about the pervasiveness of rape culture mentality, something women live with, every day, whether it's going across campus at night or to a frat party, that moment, I think, exemplified the way, it's even more important to me than whether Trump has actually assaulted and harassed women and grabbed them by the genitals, is the fact that words are actions. Those words are kinds of assault. And I think that, his cavalierness there reminded us of the pervasiveness of what lies behind rape culture, which is an attitudinal thing that perhaps hasn't shifted as much as we would have hoped. And I think that was a wake-up call, just like hearing Trump interrupt Hillary in that last debate with that nasty woman throwaway. He didn't have to say that, but the way that interrupted brought home like nothing else this level of sort of ingrained misogyny. And so it's ironic and appropriate that nasty has become such a meme, such a rallying cry for millennial women and men, as well as others who may have been reluctant to champion the Clinton calls before. I'm going to move to an end by just reading what a student in class, Lena Malila, wrote in the Daily Trojan. She's had this weekly column on politics and gender. And like she's saying, after all the charges of sexual harassment that have been stacking up to the point that we're numb to them now. I think there's number 12 came out, Miss Iceland, like last night. Who cares anymore? We've become numb to it. But she said, despite all of that, despite that in the same debate he used the phrase bad hombres, which is every bit as offensive, the nasty woman comment really wasn't that uniquely offensive, given what he said before, but it was uniquely mobilizing. Nasty became a cultural touchstone overnight. Not only did people resonate with the term, people began to sympathize with and relate to Clinton. Clinton remained composed when Trump called her a nasty woman. She hardly batted an eye. It was an almost sad moment. This accomplished, composed presidential candidate, whatever you think of her issues, her stances, her politics, had to stand on stage while sexist insults were hurled at her. For every woman who has had to ignore a catcall or hold back tears after being called a derogatory name, this moment was surely a reminder that a woman's position does not erase her vulnerability to this kind of attack. What I feel is that these very low moments that remind us that we might not have come as far as we hope we've come are actually the fodder for the resurgence of a more activist feminism that too many have held at arm's length, I think, for the last decade or so. And as I said, I think that this is becoming a teaching moment where people are, they're not just getting off on watching Scandal, which has been a lot of the sexual back and forth. It's actually like, what does this mean to who we are? What can we do about it? And is there a re-engagement with feminism in a way that will take it off of the defensive side for once and into the offensive position with a woman at the helm? But that doesn't mean that there aren't enormous handicaps, culturally, socially, whatever, to overcome that go beyond sexism and the Trump-esque form. I'm reminded of one of my friends who went to North Carolina for 3 weeks, a woman of about 65 years old, and did lots and lots of voter registration. Warm, receptive feeling from people. But she said she encountered time and time again women who wanted to register, were eager to start to become a political participant, would say, oh, let me call my husband to see which party I should register for. And I mean, we in our insulated university world forget how much of a lot of the other parts of the world, older mindset still sets in. And like there were cases, she said, where women would call up, there would be no one at home, and they'd say, I just can't register now. And my friend Judy's point was, register as an independent. If you want to talk to your husband later, you know, you can then declare a party affiliation, but just register. You can do it. And it's that sense of disempowerment. I mean, it shocked me to rehear that, but that is part of our reality too as we move forward. So on that dour note, I will come over here and sit by you.
So I want to open it up for questions, but I just want to start off with a question.
Yeah.
Something comes out of what both of you said. So despite all of the attacks and all the media treatment of Hillary, she's actually been able to recover most of the support from most of the constituencies one would have expected. That is to say, very largely the black community and all the typical Democratic communities have kind of come around.
The Obama coalition.
Except the one group that's been reluctant are young people. And across the board, you know, friends of mine, my family who are making calls, say that they're finding, regardless of the demographic, it's young people who came out for Obama were the most reluctant group to now say, well, I guess I'll support Hillary. And I'm wondering if you can speak to the issue maybe of caution, or the issues that you were discussing just a moment ago, specifically with respect to millennials who are voting for the first time, and maybe why they're resistant, and what perhaps might need to happen in order for millennials to kind of address the issues that they seem to still have with Hillary.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Hillary is somebody who seems like a slick, polished, managed candidate. And, you know, there couldn't be a bigger contrast between her and Donald Trump in that regard. I mean, Trump will tweet and say anything, and then he'll say he didn't say it. And that's not typical of Clinton. Clinton is very measured. She's measured in her policies.
I've heard that, like, and generally there's like 8 hours of thinking that goes behind any tweet that goes out. For, you know, it goes to like 84 advisors before they.
So it's I think she seems as though she's an unexciting, overly polished, overly produced candidate, and I think that helps to explain Bernie Sanders' research. I mean, his surge. I mean, he really succeeded by, you know, listen, Bernie Sanders always said the same thing. You know, it wasn't as though he ever departed from his script, really. It turns out people who have had contact with Bernie Sanders will say, well, you know, Bernie Sanders is actually pretty terrible with people. He's horrible to his staff, you know. He's not somebody who ever succeeded in getting any legislation passed, you know, when, even though he had great ideas, he's not very good at working with people. But it was the fact that he was able to take these positions that nobody else was taking. And thank God for him for doing that, right? Because he did, in the process, move Clinton to the left. If you, like me, are already somebody who thinks that the Democratic Party needs to really address some of these key issues around economic inequality, I think for me, that is an enormous issue. That is the issue in many respects. And again, I think that Trump would have done much, much better had he played to that and not been consistently diverted. But I do think that underneath that economic inequality, I do think that there is this gender issue, right, as I alluded to. But I do think it's her manner. I think it's the fact that there's rarely ever a kind of unguarded response to anything?
I'll pick up on that in a couple of ways. I think that millennials, as well as people of my generation, men as well as women, have come to expect charisma to be a defining characteristic of a presidential candidate. Trump has his own kind of charisma. He's fascinating to watch, even if you don't like him. Sanders had charisma. Obama had, barrel loads of charisma. Bill Clinton had charisma. But my point, I wish I had this article with me so I could quote more and sound more intelligent than I will now. But there was one commentator who would say, maybe it's time for our culture to revisit our notion of charisma itself as being the tell-all of a candidate, and to sort of interrogate the ways in which charisma is actually itself kind of gendered, because it depends on a certain kind of vocal, even the tone of the voice, quality that comes with a more baritone, a kind of physical presence that if you're under 5'5" is harder to attain.
But Sarah Palin,
Okay, she had charisma.
She has charisma, and it's not because of certainly the gendered equality. In that case, your point about charisma is very well taken, but the question is charisma really quite as gendered as
yeah, okay, but it's still, I think, something that we perhaps need to revisit. Because it is about show in some kind of way. In terms of millennials, I think everything Alice said is true. I had students back last year who were women in one of my 19th century novel class who were saying they were sort of pissed at the MO that was circulating that all millennials aren't Clinton supporters, because they were. And they felt like embarrassed to bring it up because there was such a big sort of like, you really should be for Sanders or you're not hip kind of thing at the time. So I think that, it may have been overly broadcasted in some ways. At the same time, there is, I think, a disconnect that has to do with Clinton being establishment more than anything else, probably, and representing a quote-unquote older generation of feminist ideals. And that's where I think the last comments I made are relevant, that there is something, ironically, it's not like giving everyone in the world, my feminist classic, Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own to read. It would make us have a new feminist moment. It's actually that, comment, I think, nasty woman, tied with the, because I'm powerful and a star, I can grab a woman in her privates kind of thing, that connects to issues that millennials, both men and women, are attuned to and feel in their bodies, in their psyches, in a way that makes them begin to empathize both more with Clinton and re-see her stodgy, old-school feminist messages as something that yet we still need to work through as a culture. So I do think there has, like this Lena is saying in her article too, there's been a way in which finally this campaign is beginning to charge at least some millennials.
The thing that fascinates me about the nasty woman remark, though, is that, it showcases Donald Trump's ability to brand something. It's just that it didn't brand something in a way that helped him. At least it would appear that it didn't. It energized a group of voters who have been sort of sitting on the fence a bit about Hillary. So that is an irony here.
Can I ask the audience either to pose a question, or if something was said that you think doesn't kind of characterize your view, you want to express it a little bit differently? Are there questions that we have for the panelists? Yes? Go ahead. It's safe here. You can ask. I saw people about to, don't go.
I actually was in the news that some universities did a study and research that Trump often expressed himself as a woman. He said, instead of saying, it shows that women, when they speak, they say, oh, my opinion, and when men say something, they say, oh, their opinion. and Trump often, he actually does express himself as a woman, saying, oh, my opinion. So maybe you can kind of collaborate or say.
Okay, so I know exactly the article that you're talking about, okay? And there was this article written by a linguist who said that if you look not at his content, but if you look at the way in which Donald Trump speaks, he speaks like a woman. Immediately thereafter, another very prominent linguist, okay, responded and said, this is just hooey, you know, no. If you really look at his speech patterns, this is not, he doesn't speak like a woman. I saw this just before I came over here. So if you send me an email, right, and you can find me online, right, through the USC webpage, I will send you the link to the rebuttal, which I think you'll find interesting.
Yeah, because I thought we're talking about this gender discrimination and equality, and then we again point out how women supposed to speak and
Yeah.
how men speak. So it kind of seems to me like an off argument, but it was, I believe, on CNN News.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
She
so
gave a report.
my take on that, because I actually sent the article out to my students and asked them, like, do you buy this or not for our class on Monday? Because I found it interesting, because, I mean, there are linguistic patterns that are culturally sort of encoded in us. It doesn't mean they're innate at all. And so I thought, well, maybe there's some plausibility, although I sort of doubt it. But basically, I have two objections. One is I, as someone who, as a literary scholar, is always looking at words, I don't believe you can separate words from tonality, context, or content. And all those together create what you might categorize as something or another. And this survey was very, like, it was dry, like this kind of subject-verb kind of thing only, and not talking about how you say huge or beautiful, you know, which I think it makes a lot of difference. Second is, say I bought the argument that in some weird way Trump has this sort of emotive, quote-unquote, feminine language. It actually is the same language that all populists have used. People who have appealed to the folk, from a Hitler to Huey Newton.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a sort of populist, emotive, on the spur kind of language that has nothing to do, to me, with gender.
Can I ask how many people here are planning to vote? Everybody. Pretty much everybody. I'm not going to ask for whom, but are you pretty much decided already who you plan to vote for? You are. And are the issues that we've been talking about today relevant to you in your decision-making process?
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Good.
Are there, and last question for our panel before we close it up for today? Go.
I recognize that Hillary Clinton's sort of guardedness might have damaged her appearance with the millennials, but I wonder if she had acted more vulnerable as a woman or unguarded, would that have damaged her to a greater extent with the traditional mindset?
Well, yeah, a great question. I mean, I think, you know, you saw what happened in 2008, and to what extent the fact that that didn't hurt her when she had that not even close to a breakdown, right? Not even close to a meltdown. The fact that it brought down the wrath of the punditry and the cartoonists and the columnists is nonetheless interesting, right? And so I think that that remains dangerous territory. I think that that would have actually hurt Elizabeth Warren, too, because Warren is very fiery. And Trump is always, you know, whenever he gets attacked by her, you know, he always gets, you know, sort of insinuates that, well, there's the Pocahontas charge, of course, you know, but also that she's crazy. You know, she's crazy. Look at her. You know, Elizabeth Warren is crazy, and I think it's because she is really unmanaged and unprocessed in that way. So I think that, yeah, I mean, it's a very, you're on a tightrope as a female candidate. You don't have the same latitude that I think a male candidate has. So I think that's a great question. And I think she would have gotten into bigger trouble.
It's a kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. And there's this one interview I read with Clinton where she's musing on that, and she admits, yeah, it's sort of like that. I'm not going to win either way. And she says, so I just have to focus on trudging forward and getting the work done. which is actually, you know, that's not very glamorous, that's not very charismatic.
It's very good
But
girl.
And it does fall into that good girl, but it actually, you know, getting work done is something about being.
It's what we want our
you
politicians
sort
to
of want,
do.
You know, with all the brouhaha about nothing gets done in Washington, it seems like that's what you would want.
You know, people who know her say privately, she's actually a lot of fun.
She's a lot of fun,
And
I've
she
heard.
tells
Yeah.
off-color jokes, and then
Yeah.
so maybe after she wins,
Yeah.
we'll get a little bit more of a sense, you know.
I think we're already getting a little bit more, you know.
Possible. Any last questions, or should we thank our panel?